democracy and a rules-based international system. The best way of achieving results on our interests is promoting our values. The whole point is, how do we get there? You've heard me saying this quite a few times. We live in very unstrategic times, where a picture or a video on the web makes a pressure on the policymakers that is impressive, and sometimes it's under pressure that decisions are taken. It's precisely in these moments when the pressure is huge and all voices push in one sense or another, and sometimes within a week push in different directions. Let me give you an example. The picture of the little boy on the shores of the Mediterranean that died. The immediate emotional push of our public opinion was, you have to save lives. After a couple of weeks, the fears made the push towards closure of borders and a completely different kind of policy. These are the times when we have to really need to stay rational and think strategically, because policy making needs to have obviously some permeability with emotions. For sure, we are human beings, all of us, but also strategic vision and rationality at the basis of it. In other words, we need to follow our principles while we react to a changing reality. And the first principle, I believe, is that we need to engage in international affairs. Turning inwards is simply not an option. It is not an option in today's world. It's for sure not an option for us Europeans. It would make us more and not less vulnerable. Close our eyes until it goes away. That is not a policy that can defeat Daesh. It's not a policy that can stabilize Libya or Ukraine. It is not a policy that will stop climate change. It is not a policy that will manage migratory and refugee flows. But engagement alone, even with the best of intentions, can have painful, controversial, and even counterproductive effects if it is not guided by a sense of responsibility. We know, for instance, the dangers of military adventurism all too well. Intervening abroad backfires without a clear idea of what happens next, how you engage with key players, how you build partnerships. And here is where the strategies come in. This is the third principle we can never forget as Europeans: partnerships. The days when the weakness of my neighbor was my strength are long gone for us Europeans. Instability in our region can only bring instability here in Europe. And finally, we're all recognizing it. We need not weak neighbors, but strong neighbors and strong cooperations with them. No country alone, and not even a united Europe alone, can carry the whole world on its shoulders. We have a number of strong partners, close to home and far away, with historic ties, and investing in our friendships means investing in our future, but also in the present, of their stability and ours. And in a contested world, or as Obama says, in a complicated, connected world, Natalie has written the article for Obama, we found out this. In a contested world, however, we also need to build consensus among those with different views and find some common pathways towards peace and stability. And what Jean-Marc has mentioned on the need to find some elements of common ground, even where there are conflicts and difficulties and different kind of approaches, is indeed the European way to foreign policy and diplomacy. It's most of all with those with whom you do not agree that you need to talk and have a dialogue. This is controversial, always, difficult, always, but also useful most of the times. It's engagement, responsibility, partnership. Our engagement needs to be responsible and it needs to be cooperative. We then need to translate these principles into concrete action. The strategy looks at the coming 5 or 10 years. Listing today's crisis would not make much sense and would bring us to a 100-page document. So we decided to identify 5 broad priorities, the immediate test for our foreign policy. First, the European Union must strengthen itself, working on defense, security and solidarity. This includes building up our defense and doing so in a cooperative manner, making our intelligence services work together. It includes working against radicalization in our societies, together in a coordinated way, monitoring hybrid threats, investing in cybersecurity and strategic communications, strengthening our energy security, all of this together in a coordinated way. But this is also about preserving the Schengen system with new asylum rules. In a phrase, we need a 21st century approach to security and to European security. Second, we need to invest in the resilience of states and societies in and around Europe, to the east and to the south. Support effective and democratic institutions, protect the space for civil society, because this is also part of society's resilience, address migration in the countries of transit and origin before it comes to the sea, where it is most complicated to manage, promote socio-economic development, fight climate change and promote energy transitions. This is a complex priority which will need to be fleshed out country by country with specific approaches. But if we put together all our assets and resources as a real union, using all our tools, we can truly help our partners resist all kinds of shocks, which will also help us resist that kind of shocks. Third, as we do all we can to put an end to the current crisis, from Syria to Libya, from Somalia to South Sudan, we must also prevent the next crisis. We must address problems before they boil up and get out of control. This may not get us in the headlines, but it is the most effective way to save human lives and protect our interests. I often say the best news is when we do not receive bad news. And already preventing crisis would be a major step to invest in our security. Fourth, regional orders. We must strengthen regional orders because the causes of conflicts have an increasingly transnational nature. Our cooperation with the US and NATO can only grow stronger, as much as that with the African Union, CELAC and ASEAN. And mentioning the three of them, it's exactly the three organizations that I met in the last, I think, 2 weeks in different trips around the world. This to say that we cannot, as we prioritize work in our region, stop there, because our partnerships with faraway regional interlocutors can help us managing the crisis close to home. In some parts of the world, like Africa, we need to strengthen existing organizations. In other cases, we need new and creative formats, building, for example, on the inclusive process we have started in Vienna on Syria, and where we are together working very well. But in the long run, a network of bilateral, trilateral, sub-regional and regional organizations can be the best base for a more cooperative global order. This brings me to the last priority, that is a better global governance, one priority that you also mentioned very clearly. Global governance truly fit for our age. This was a year of very important achievements for the international community, from the Iran deal to Sustainable Development Goals and obviously COP21. And we managed all of them through different formats, but all aiming at multilateralism and diplomacy as a way and as a method. We have to stick to this path and work on a system based on rules, but we also have to be imaginative. The nature of threats changes by the day. We call it the predictable unpredictability of our future. If we keep this in mind, we understand the international system doesn't simply need conversation, but deep change. If you think of these 5 priorities, it is crystal clear that the strategy will mark the beginning of our work and not the end. But the sense of the work we've done so far was also to test a method, and I think it worked quite well so far, thanks to you as well. We have tried to include all institutions, and it worked well. Incredibly well. All member states, people from all walks of life in the definition of our foreign policy. We have tried to work as a true union, a union of countries and a union of citizens, first of all. And if we listen to our citizens, there is, perhaps for the first time, the feeling that our union is, yes, very much needed, because the scale of threats is huge, and at least on a continental level, but also that our union is facing, maybe for the first time, an existential threat. I would like to be very clear on this. The threat does not come from the outside. The only real existential threat Europe is facing is a union with no solidarity, a union of free riders and lone warriors. Our union will not work if we are part-time Europeans. A union that works with our full-time commitment, with a vision, a strategy, and a union that manages to put everything together is what we need. Because we will not have solutions to today's problems if we will not have European solutions. I am convinced we can make it. I think this strategy, this collective vision, can also help our union somehow to rediscover its identity and its soul. And I would like again to thank Jean-Marc, all the French friends that has helped us shaping this path, and all of you that contributed so much to the work so far. But leaving you with a warning, we have not finished yet. We will not have finished by June, not in the sense that the strategy will not be ready by June, it will be, but after the presentation of the strategy, we will need to work to make it real and life and policy. And this might be an even more challenging exercise, but I'm sure that we will work very well together also on the follow-up. Thank you very much. Merci beaucoup. Je reste là. Oui, je reste là.
We are very grateful to the Foreign Minister for addressing our group and for the kind words for our work. The High Representative is, as usual, I have to say, ready and willing to take questions and comments from you in order to continue the conversation in a more interactive fashion. We have had a very, very good debate, I think I can say, throughout the day. Frank, focused and forward-looking. And I think it will continue right now, and some of the issues that were already raised throughout the day will be raised again directly to you, and will give you the opportunity also to reply in person. And therefore, I'm opening the floor for questions and comments. I will collect little groups at each round, as long as the High Representative can stay with us.
Yes, would like to start? And I would like to stress, I'm always ready to and willing to answer questions, but I'm also looking for comments and suggestions, because sometimes you have the answers as much as I have. So I accept comments and suggestions as well.
I see two hands here in the front rows and one in the middle at this stage. Introduce yourself, even if the representative may know you.
Thank you. I'm Heather Graby from the European University Institute in Florence. Thank you very much for your remarks. You pointed at the end to the huge danger we face from inside the Union to foreign policy, a union of free riders and lone warriors, as you put it. What do you think, after your experience now in this job for some time, is the answer to the collective action problem we have at EU level? How can we bring member states together, particularly in the migration crisis, around common objectives as well as agreement on the means? In the previous session, Robert Cooper was pointing out that unanimity is often a great strength of foreign policy, because once you've got unanimity, member states tend to stick to it. It wouldn't be possible to maintain, for example, sanctions on Russia if it had been imposed by QMV. So QMV is not the answer. But what is the answer when you have fundamentally different interests between member states and therefore different definitions of the problem?
Right. Right behind you.
Thank you very much. I'm Ian Bond from the Centre for European Reform. High Representative, you said that in order to protect our interests, we need to promote our values. And on a certain level, I agree with that. But when I look at the approach that the EU has taken, say, towards Egypt, it's rather hard to see that in action. It looks as though actually we have swept our values under the carpet in order to protect our interests. So I'd be interested to hear more about how, in those difficult circumstances, you think we can promote our values when you're facing a government which takes a very different view.
And there, in the middle, danger.
Marcin Terlikowski, Polish Institute of International Affairs. A question, a comment, if I may. A short question would be, how do you see the strategy, Your Excellency, linked to the very pragmatic problems of the EU citizens, which now in some countries are facing the issue of the wave of the migration and the inability of the systems of the state to cope with that. On the other hand, when you look to the eastern region of Europe, there is an uncertainty about the future of the geopolitical and legal order established after the Cold War. So my question would be, how do you see this strategy being a document, being a strategic message, but at the same time a kind of a program and a kind of an action plan for the EU? How do you see it link with here and now, and merging this need of being strategic, so forward-looking, and setting up a path with providing some answers to the current problem, so that the entire process and the result of its process is simply viable here and now? Thank you.
Ready?
Yes. On this last point, this is, on one side, I believe, and I mentioned that in the end of my speech, I believe that a strategy can help the European Union in this moment also to focus on what is needed today, even if we don't do a list of things immediately needed to solve the crisis, in order to focus on the common ground. This is also partially maybe an answer to the first question. What do I mean by that? My mother understands perfectly well that if there is an attack in Brussels, the answer would not be found in one city of Belgium, and not even in one country of the European Union, but with an exchange of information of intelligence services of the European member states, a cooperation with countries that are crossed by foreign fighters going from Europe to Syria and back, a collective diplomatic effort to try and solve the crisis in Syria, and a collective effort to break the financing of terrorist organizations, and so on. So our citizens understand well that either we move to the continent, the real European integrated way of creating responses to the challenges we have today, or we simply do not have solutions. This is true for many other issues apart from terrorism. It is true for migration, I'll come to that in a minute. It is true for climate, it is true for economy, by the way, where we see the added value of joining forces as Europeans in situations that otherwise would be much more difficult for us. And again, I would turn back to the words of Obama that I quoted in the beginning to say, that is the size you need in order to make relevant whatever policy you think. So it could be helpful in defining the method and the level we need in order also to shape answers to today's problems. And it can include some ideas, it will include some ideas that might need maybe a little bit of time to be developed and become European policies, but could help shape the public debate and the policy making towards solutions for the problems of today that will be also problems of tomorrow, because the issue of how we manage migratory flows is a problem of today, but will be a problem also in 5-10 years, and was a problem also 5-10 years ago. It's just that if we don't start working on it with European policies, we will never find the adequate solutions to that, and so in 5-10 years from now we will still face the same kind of problem. So I think that we will have a mix of ideas, of policies that can be helpful also for today's problems, and a series of messages on the methodology that would be important and useful for solving today's problems. And then we have another dimension of it, which is the action plans or the sub-strategies. We will talk about that after we finalize the strategy. But the couple of sectorial documents that can help us translating the vision and the strategy into what we do tomorrow and the day after tomorrow in the next 6-7 months, 1-2 years, 3 years, to make sure that this vision and strategy translates into action. And I think that, again, as I said, we would need that on the defense part of it, the proper defense and security part of it, but also on another couple of areas where we would need to also indicate then to the institutions, to Council, to Parliament, to the Commission, what would be needed. to take action. Second, on Egypt, no, I don't agree. I think that on the European Union level, what we're doing is perfectly consistent with our values. Actually, sometimes, let me say, we are, I wouldn't say alone, but we are the ones that voice and channel our concerns on human rights more than single member states alone. Again, not because we like pointing fingers, but because we believe it is in the interest not only of ourselves, but also of the Egyptian authorities in that case, but also can apply to other countries, to build an open society that in itself is much more resilient and strong than a society that is not seeing the full participation, the full and free participation of all its components. So we are doing a constant work, for instance, to support the civil society in Egypt, to try to have the indications of the constitution fully implemented and things like that. This is a constant work. Sometimes it doesn't get the headlines, but this doesn't mean that the work is not ongoing, on the contrary. The first question, what is the answer to this crisis of collective action on the European level? The debate on qualified majority voting or versus unanimity could lead us in a theoretical and slightly ideological debate on the nature of our union. I believe, and I see, you know very well, the councils I chair work by unanimity, others work by qualified majority voting. I see the pros of both, personally. And in my experience, what counts the most at the end of the day, when we have starting points that are different and we have to get to a common result that can be implemented the day after, because that is the point, is to do the political exercise that no regulation would give you advices on agreeing not on the wording, but on the policy. I heard some describing my job as the need to have 28 agreeing on wording. I think this is not the case. What we have to do is not agreeing on the wording of the text of Council conclusions. What we need, because then it stays on the paper. What we need to do is to do a much more difficult job, because on wording you can find synonyms and you can arrange a text. What we need to do is identifying the common interest to adopt a policy that then everybody has an interest in implementing. This works. Being it qualified majority voting, being it unanimity, the point is shaping European policies that everybody recognizes at a certain moment, might be before or after the voting, in case of qualified majority voting, he or she has an interest in making work. And this is an issue of, in Italian we would say, direzione politica.
Political leadership and direction.
Political leadership, or really shaping, building the consensus, but for real, not on words. Again, we have focused so much time in the past, and sometimes even in the present, in adjusting the commas. What we need is not agreeing on words. We need agreeing on what do we do tomorrow together. Sometimes, in my daily work, sometimes some of the ambassadors present in the room might not like it at all, and some of them told me, but sometimes I prefer not to have Council conclusions, but to have substantial agreements among the ministers, even if it's not written on paper, because this guarantees us that from the day after we act together with the same direction. Sometimes wording is more difficult than policies. What we need is the policies agreed. And again, I think the key is, yes, leadership, and focusing on the long-term interests of the citizens. Sometimes our political leadership doesn't take the necessary time, let's be diplomatic, to focus on what provides the real answer to the problem, and not the immediate narrative. The immediate narrative might differ from the real solution of the problem. We have to look at the real solution and to build the narrative around that.
Thank you. I have Robert Cooper, Shada Islam. Start with Robert Cooper over there.
Thank you very much, High Representative. I like the speech and I like the work that Natalie is doing very much. I just wanted to ask, looking to the East, would you say that the problem is Russia, or would you say the problem was Ukraine, or do you think the problem is us?
That is an easy question. Shada?
A fourth option. All.
Thank you, Ms. Mogherini. Thank you very much for your insights. I think we all agree that we do live in a very unpredictable and volatile world. But one thing has been sure and certain for some time now, and that is that Saudi Arabia and I'm here, Ms. Mogherini. Sorry, can't get up. One thing has been sure for quite a bit of time now is that the toxic extremist Wahhabi ideology of Islam is being exported by Saudi Arabia across the Muslim world, but also into Europe through the financing of mosques and imams and all that. I was just wondering, what tools do we have in our toolbox that would allow us to counteract? Is it through just relations with the Shia Islam, like in Iran, or is it also through Muslim democracies, say in Asia, like Indonesia, Malaysia, and perhaps even Pakistan and Bangladesh? And my second point is, you've just come back from ASEAN. You've just had meetings in Jakarta, and President Jokowi was here in Brussels yesterday. Can you give us your insights on what you see ASEAN turning into? I mean, they have lots of ambitions, lots of goals and ambitions, but what is your realistic vision of where ASEAN is going and how it can be a partner for Europe? Thank you.
And the third one from Vlado here, and then we'll have another round.
Thank you very much. Vlado Bilčík, Slovak Foreign Policy Association. I think what's clear from not just the presentation this afternoon, but also from the whole debate here is that keeping the strategy alive, if and when adopted, and also making it work is going to be a very public and political exercise ultimately. So I guess my question is about your thinking more broadly about involving the others, particularly the member states, because ultimately it's going to be up to the member states and other institutions. And specifically, I'd like to ask about the degree of involvement and consultations and planning vis-a-vis the current EU Council trio, or perhaps the tasks for the upcoming EU Council presidency, which is going to be held by Slovakia. What has been the extent of consultations and preparations? Because you mentioned defense. If the strategy is adopted, obviously there is going to be something which is going to be expected of the EU Council presidency vis-a-vis defense. But there are other issues on the table, like which we know, which are in the pipeline, and like the market economy status for China and the deadline at the end of this year. So what is the level of engagement, and what are your expectations, if you can be a bit more specific? Thank you.
Thank you. On this, this was part of our initial reflections when we were thinking together. And I remember we discussed this, I think more or less in this format in Brussels a few months ago, when we were thinking whether to go towards a sort of follow-up of the security strategy of 2003, so with a narrow, well, not really narrow, but specific scope, or to go to a global strategy, and also what kind of working method to adopt. And it was very clear to all of us, and also shared in the Council, including in the European Council, that we didn't need a drafting exercise at 28. This strategy is not Council conclusions. Again, if I say we do not need to agree on wording in the Council, but on policies, that is even more true for a strategy. We don't need to have every single member state or every single government of member states agreeing on every single word on strategy. We need every single member state, government, parliaments, different institutions, citizens, to feel comfortable and ownership of the result without entering into a negotiating phase. Having said that, this has meant for the process done so far, and even more for the next couple of months, a much more intense work of sharing and listening and discussing, because the only way in which you can guarantee ownership without negotiating the wording is through a real exercise of sharing visions that can allow everybody to feel that there is your own thinking in it. Obviously, the own thinking of 500 million citizens in one document is a challenge, so it would not happen. But I think that obviously we have to see in the coming weeks. But I think that we have identified so far a substantial common ground, focusing on the added value of the European Union in the foreign and security policy, which is bringing everybody on the same page. So I think this is going to be the result. In terms of expectations for the upcoming presidency, I believe this would be very important, as the Dutch presidency has been extremely important and is still very important in these last phases. First of all, to accompany us in this shaping and building the ownership of all. But for the Slovak presidency, it would be key on the implementation phase. Because obviously, once we have this strategy, we will have to start working on what do we do together with the member states, with the council, with the different formations of the council. Not only the foreign ministers, not only the defense ministers, but the trade ministers, the environmental ministers, the culture ministers, the economy ministers, I mean, you name them, on different strands of action. And this would be somehow at the disposal of the presidency and of all the member states to decide how to make this real in their policies on an everyday basis. So I have high expectations of it, and I'm sure that will be in very good hands. Wahhabism. What we can do. This is something I've discussed a lot in the last weeks with some of my interlocutors in some of the countries you mentioned. With Indonesia, for sure, which is, you know that well, but maybe I share this with our other friends. Alone, Indonesia has more Muslim citizens than all the Arab countries put together, which provides us quite a good critical mass to work on a concept of Islam that is used to coexist with others, other religions, other cultures. And I have found there, as well as I've found in Jordan or in Morocco or in other countries, readiness to work together with Europe on, I would say, a way of interpreting Islam that could be useful for our continent. Obviously, we are very respectful of the autonomy of religious communities. Each country has different methods, but the European way is obviously that European institutions do not interfere with religious affairs. But we could offer instruments for exchanges or investing in reciprocal knowledge and cooperation between or among religious authorities or communities across countries that are looking for partners also in Europe to strengthen their vision of Islam, let's put it this way. So I think that this can be the way, and we're working on it. On ASEAN, you're right. I had a very good meeting with the ASEAN COREPER and with the ASEAN Secretariat. We are working on getting to a strategic partnership between the European Union and ASEAN. I believe that it is the case for ASEAN, can be the case for other regional organizations. That is not mine, right? No. Hope not. Sorry. Normally that's switched off, and that is why people complain I never reply. That was not the case, but now I make sure it happens. Sorry. No, I exclude that. but I could make a joke on having the telephone number of Europe. So I believe that the future for ASEAN is increased regional cooperation and structured cooperation, and this is exactly the way in which I believe they are trying to work. The third question. What should I say? I try to focus not on what the problem is, but what the solution can be. Obviously, we have easy answers. Easy, not easy. There are never easy answers, but we have consolidated answers on, obviously, responsibilities on the problems we're facing in the East. And to me, there is no doubt that changing the borders by force is always a source of problems, including in the east of our continent, and most of all in the east of our continent. And we have a serious problem there with the security architecture in Europe, that at the end of the day is the issue here. Do we respect the rules we've given to ourselves? Do we respect mutual sovereignty? And obviously you cannot overcome this. So there is a clear responsibility on Russia here, especially on the annexation of Crimea. That will never, I think, be underestimated by any of the European member states and by any of the European institutions. The point now is, as I think Jean-Marc was mentioning, how do we try to get solutions, especially to the Ukrainian crisis? We have discussed very recently with the foreign ministers of all the 28 our engagement with Russia, making very clear we insist on the full implementation of Minsk, not only with Russia, also with the Ukrainian authorities, which is what we're doing as well. But we also have to develop the framework of our relations with Russia, because there are issues in our neighborhood on foreign policy, on some of the global issues, where it is European interest, and in some cases also Ukrainian interest, by the way, to engage with Russia selectively, where there is a clear interest for us to do so. And so I believe that this could be a way of trying to build channels of communication that can be used on disagreements, because it's always better to talk rather than not to. And by the way, that is exactly the same approach that NATO is taking just in these days. But also on the fields where cooperation with Russia is not only needed, but also welcomed. The work we did together on Iran, and we continue to do together on Iran. Just today, we have the third meeting of the Joint Commission following the Iranian nuclear deal taking place in Vienna, where we chair. The Russians are present together with the others. And there we will continue to work together for years on implementation of the agreement. There we need cooperation. On the Middle East peace process, in the Quartet, we need to work together, and we do work together on the basis of very similar approaches. On Syria, as difficult as it can be, and as it is, I am extremely positive on the fact and on the need to have the Russians and the Americans having, for instance, a military-to-military coordination, because there is no other way of finding ways to coordinate actions on the ground if there is not a certain degree of exchanges. Again, some might argue, why not Europe and the Americans? Because Europe is not a military actor on Syria as such, while we are cooperating and coordinating with the Russians on other things, like on the humanitarian deliveries or on the political process. So there are, or take Libya, or the issue of countering the traffickers of people, smugglers of people, where we do need and we do want a cooperation with Russia, or counterterrorism, or climate, or Afghanistan, take another scenario. So I believe the issue of selective engagement is the key, keeping firm our position on the full implementation of Minsk with the Russians and also with the Ukrainian authorities. This doesn't answer to where is the problem, but hopefully provides an answer of what can be the answer to the problem.
One last round. Nicole.
Thank you very much. I'm Nicole Niesotto. I was the first director of this institute. I have a comment and a question. My comment is I like very much one of the final message you gave when you say that the EU is facing an existential threat not outside the EU but inside the EU. And I think if there is a communication strategy, and I hope there will be a communication strategy, and if there are core message to the press, this has to be, in my view, one of the most important points. My question is, it seems to me that there is a growing gap between the citizen, the European citizen, who feel more and more insecure, and at the same time, they're feeling that the EU is more and more divided and impotent. And this credibility gap, I think, seems to me very difficult to overcome. My question is, if, let's say, until Christmas, you had to choose one or two small things, small decisions you ought to make in order to show to the people that not only the EU is aware of the security issue, but is giving some concrete answers. What could it be? Could it be, for example, to accelerate the negotiation of the Garde Frontière in order to secure Schengen? Could it be that to ask, for example, a European fund for refugees in order to prevent extreme right, to say that we keep the money from our poor to give to the external poor? I mean, do you have some... Could it be, for example, a special partnership for Tunisia before Tunisia fall into Islamic radicalism and so on? Do you have one or two examples of concrete and small things, not small anyway, but that the EU could do in order to reassure the people? Because I do believe that we need reassurance, not only from national government, but for EU government too.
Right behind you.
Werner Fassler, President of the Austria Institute for European and Security Policy. You lined out already that, of course, in our immediate neighborhood, neither in the post-Soviet space nor in the Middle East, we are the lonely or only actors. The situation is a little bit different for me in big parts of Africa. You mentioned South Sudan. I visited the country last week, and I only can say, if the people do not master the president, the vice president, the situation now, we probably will go into a situation very similar to Somalia within 3 or 5 years. But what I see is much more the whole region, the Sahel region, and the northern African parts that are very decisive also for our security in the future. So what I see is that on the one hand, in this region, they have the weakest physical conditions, which means through desertification, through climate change. At the other hand, they have the highest fertility rate, at the same time the lowest GDP and the weakest government effectiveness. And insofar, they certainly need help for stabilization and assistance. What I think we would need probably is a stabilization axis, shaping of a stabilization axis, not only between Casablanca and Cairo, but also between Dakar and Djibouti. This should be probably one of the most important projects for European Union. My question is, what is your position on that?
Olivier?
Thank you very much. My name is Olivier de France. I'm with IRIS here in Paris. Thank you, High Representative. I'm afraid I'm going to raise the elephant in the room question. According to what happens on 23rd of June, in the best case scenario and in the worst case scenario, what's your frame of mind? Is it no comment? Is it wait and see? Is it crisis management? Or is it keep calm and carry on?
And last but not least, the ambassador over there.
Thank you very much. I'm Nicolas Pascual, Spanish PSC ambassador. Thank you very much, High Representative here. Thank you for being with us and sharing with us some very interesting insights into the global strategy. Thank you very much, Antonio, for organizing this wonderful event, and thank you to Natalia for the impressive work that you are delivering. I have only one question, but I hope a comprehensive question that has to do with preventive diplomacy and conflict prevention, which has not been dealt with so much today here. Normally, we are taken by surprise by all the international events which are happening around us. We are taken by surprise by the Arab Spring. Not only us, but it's not consolation. We are taken by surprise with the emergence of ISIS-Daesh. We are taken by surprise with a huge wave of refugees coming from Syria through Turkey. We were taken by surprise with the Russians questioning the post-Cold War security strategy and the invasion of Crimea. Do you think that the EAS could be, and of course the member states, how could contribute to it, better equipped in order to have a kind of preventive diplomacy and mediation so that we sometime, not always, but sometime could prevent events and not only to be on a reactive mode? Thank you very much.
Federica, you have the last word.
Thank you. I'll start with that. When you were mentioning the list of issues that took us by surprise, I spotted at least a couple of them that were definitely not a surprise for some. And for sure, others that were not on my list of not a surprise might not have been a surprise for others in this room. This to say that I believe that collectively we do have a sort of early warning system politically of all the 28 plus European institutions plus this community in this room. I am sure that, again, if you put together all of us together, none of this event was a full surprise for at least one person in the room. What is the problem? That even when we have the early warning system, not the technical one, I mean the political one, we not necessarily listen or take action. That is the problem. I could have told you 2-3 years ago, as an Italian, that the refugee migration issue was going to come with massive dimension to all over Europe. But not necessarily I would have been hurt. And as a Spanish, you know that very well, because actually Spain was one of the first to face it. So the point is not that we do not have the instruments to read what is coming. The problem is that sometimes we don't want to hear, because taking decisions is considered to be politically too difficult or too costly or simply unpopular. But then the price you pay for not having developed the political willingness to face the risk and the reality before it comes becomes double, if not triple or more. So I think that we do not need necessarily to, obviously we need also to improve our systematic reading of what is coming up. But if you ask, again, all of you in this room to, this could be a nice exercise, collect 3 things that you believe will come up as a major problem or a major crisis from now to 10 years. I'm sure that if we open the papers in not even 5 to 10 years, but even 1 or 2 years, we find some of them coming to reality. The point is having a structured, common approach to this and having the courage to face the crisis before they come. Because here we come back to political leadership, I'm afraid. And here, again, we can develop the best strategy in the world. We need to make it live. That is the point. Because it is very difficult for political leadership to take decisions that might be difficult to take if not under pressure. And this is a structural problem of our time that we need to overcome exactly with a strategy, I believe, because our citizens understand very well that it is much more difficult to face a crisis after it has developed. So I'm convinced that the preventive diplomacy angle is the key, and again, the strategy could help us, at least sharing the assessment that if we do not take action today, in 1, 3, 5, 10 years' time, this is what your citizens, our citizens, will face. And so hopefully this could, let's say, raise the awareness publicly, which means also putting political pressure that allows the political decisions to be made. And I agree perfectly with you, the communication angle of the strategy will be key. We were discussing this just this morning with Natalie. We need to make sure that the strategy is something that can live also in the European public opinions. Because, and this is what I was mentioning at the end of my speech, we are living a sort of identity crisis in Europe, where we have the tools, we have the resources, We have the money, we have the capacities, we have the strength, we have the size, we have the institutions. Jean-Marc was mentioning, in many cases, we even have the articles in the treaties, but we're sort of paralyzed. It's a paralysis out of panic that is simply not sustainable, because either we wake up or nobody else will give answers to our citizens. We need a little bit more of self-confidence and realizing all the instruments we have in order to use them. You can be a superpower, but if you don't know you're a superpower, you don't act like one. And so it's even useless to have the instruments you have. And seen from the outside, we are so much. I mean, wherever you go in the world, Europe is the first donor, the first trading partner, the first investor, the first diplomatic presence, the first political interlocutor. And when I say Europe, I mean EU plus member states combined. But the point is that we continue to argue that we are weak and small and limited and divided. Well, if you continue to say so, it's difficult to get out of this negative mood that makes it very difficult for us to simply work on the solutions we need. On the solutions, measures, concrete examples. I would mention 3 or 4, but the list could be long. But the first one I wrote on my paper before you asked your question is Sahel. I can show you. Working on the mix of security, development, climate, empowerment of people in the Sahel in an integrated regional way, I think is going to give or to have a huge impact on the security of European citizens, because we see it here in France, we see it very clearly. It affects whatever happens in terms of security in the Sahel, affects lives of Europeans. It has been the case for all the terrorist attacks in the Sahel in these months. But more than that, the risk of a conjunction through Libya or through the Horn of Africa, the Gulf Horn of Africa, and Boko Haram, of the terrorist organizations could explode in a lethal mix that would come through Europe. The border of Europe is not the Mediterranean. The border of Europe is the Sahel. Now it's quite clear. So I think that is an investment too, and this is why the Trust Fund for Africa that we have established in Valletta, that has started, by the way, to finance projects for 700 million euros, so quite enough so far, but we're continuing, is focusing 2/3 on the Sahel. So this is something that I believe is key and that we are doing already. Second, Libya, connected to the Sahel. If we manage to, from now to the next 6-7 months, establish a support and a partnership with the Libyan authorities, including the municipalities and the different security structures in Libya, to help prevent the major worsening of the situation, both from the security point of view, because the Libyans perceive Daesh as a threat to themselves. It's an external entity. So we still have the possibility of building a partnership to defeat Daesh in Libya now. 1 year from now could be too late. So that is number 2. Number 3, getting closer, Western Balkans. I think that in line with what we discussed about anti-radicalization or de-radicalization or preventing of radicalization, we have a major work to do in the Western Balkans to make sure that every single country in the Western Balkans gets a clear European perspective that motivates the people to continue the path of reforms and European values. And one is an internal thing, so it's not in my hands, but the real thing that would give immediately to our citizens a sense that we finally woke up is if we manage to create a real system of exchanging intelligence inside Europe. That would be the sign. 23rd of June.
What time?
What? No, I'm not in a denial mode, but my answer would be very easy. It is not a foreign policy issue. and I'm confident it will not be a foreign policy issue. It would be very sad if it was a foreign policy issue, relations between the European Union and the UK. It would be unfair to the UK, it would be unfair for Europe. I couldn't even say for Europe, because Europe is also the UK, but most of all, it would be a huge loss for the European foreign and defence policy. Because, and this is a message that I would like to be heard in the UK, the contribution that the UK is giving, not only to our strategy, but also to our foreign and security policy at European level, is essential. It's huge, and it's, it would, let's say, the foreign and security policy of Europe, of the European Union, would look completely different without the UK. And the UK, as Obama wrote this morning, would have much less instruments for its own foreign policy and security policy outside of the European Union. And I made one example in London that I would like to close with, exactly on the added value and the synergies between the member states and the European Union as such. We had the London conference on Syria a few months ago, where the European Union pledged, European Union plus member states pledged 2/3 of the total, which gives you the sense, first of all, of the work we have to do still with the others, but also of the weight and the size of our contribution. But the relevant example is another one. At that conference, the UK had a great idea to work with Lebanon on a compact, and also with Jordan, and the right example is the one with Jordan, on a compact for Jordan and Lebanon, combining different aspects, pledging money, but also creating some conditions, especially for Jordanian economic development and investments, to be able to grow, with some derogations to some rule of origin measures that would have allowed foreign investors to invest more in Jordan, provided that more Syrians were finding jobs in Jordan. So, Jordanian economy growing, foreign investors investing more in Jordan, more jobs for the Jordanians, more jobs for the Syrians, less flow of Syrians outside of Jordan, the perfect win-win-win-win-win situation. But all of that brilliant UK idea needed a decision on the European Union level on the rules of origin. And the UK managed to deliver that compact because we managed, and the ambassadors in the room know that well, to create a European consensus to make it possible. Having that brilliant idea outside of the European Union would have made, in any case, impossible for the UK to make it real. It would have probably presented to us an idea from the outside, but would have been very difficult, I believe, for the European Union to develop an idea coming completely from the outside. So to say that every single member state, including the UK, and especially the UK that has so many brilliant ideas, need the entirety of the European instruments to make them happen. The same goes for the Mediterranean naval operation we have at sea against the traffickers. The same goes for so much else that we have in common. So it's none of the four options. It's a strong argument for the UK's sovereignty to be served in the proper way inside the European Union. Thanks a lot. And I understand that now we proceed to the most important part of the day.
Yes, but my job is to end here and now. Our conference was titled The Final Stage, but as you see, first of all, we are already discussing the global strategy in action and its implementation, and rather than the beginning of the end, which sounds a little bit apocalyptic, it has been the end of the beginning. Of course, the Institute stands ready to continue this conversation beyond April, beyond June, but let me thank the High Representative, as usual, the foreign minister, all the participants in the panel, and all of you, and if you allow me, all the team of the UISS for having made this a successful and I hope useful event. I'll wish you all a safe trip back and a nice weekend, not necessarily in that order. Alfredo.
And we look forward to the completion of the project. Yesterday, we issued our opinion about EDIS, about the European Deposit Insurance Scheme, which on the whole is quite favorable and forthcoming towards the proposal of the Commission that has been presented some time ago. It's an important step for that completion. It's now in the hands of the member states to follow through all the necessary procedures. At the same time, we highlight in that opinion that, of course, the strengthening of banking union and monetary union have to proceed by implementing in parallel both risk-sharing measures like banking union and risk-sharing and risk-reducing measures. And that was part of the discussion today, where we also have been quite active in the working group that provided the basis for our discussion today, as indeed the risk-reducing measures impact the implementation of monetary policy as they affect money markets and debt markets, and we were then very much involved in that work. Regarding finally climate change and green finance, it's a point that also we have been working on as a central bank and other central banks, also in the context of our participation in international fora, in particular the Financial Stability Board that has been working on the issue and is preparing a major report to enhance the disclosure of all financial institutions in what regards their exposures to sectors that impact climate change. And of course, as being also at the same time very much involved in preparation of stress tests to different type of financial institutions, we will be ready to analyze what can be done to follow up what Governor Klaas not just said about extending stress tests also to elements that have to do with the exposures and creation of risks to climate change on the part of the activities of financial institutions.
Thank you. Any questions? Yes, the gentleman in the back.
Hi, Jim Brunsden from the Financial Times. So a question for the Commission and the Presidency. Given this debate that's going on now about the capital treatment of sovereign debt, where does that actually leave the EDIS proposal? Because the Germans have been quite clear they want this addressed as a matter of urgency, but the consensus seems to be that the sovereign debt risk weighting issue is one best looked at international level, and that's bound to take some time. So how do you move forward with the EDIS proposal in those circumstances? Thank you.
Well, both on substance and politically, there's a strong link between the two sides of the agenda that we just sketched. I think that the design of the roadmap will be about what steps are we going to take at what point between now and 2024. As you know, the banking union has a transition period, also the resolution fund will be gradually filled over that period, will be mutualized over that period. So I think we need to use that same period to put also the remaining elements on the single rule book and EDIS and the common backstop in place. So give us a bit more time to design that roadmap, and you'll see what happens when and how does it sort of interconnect between the two different files. Yes, sir.
Yes, Detlef Fechtner with Börsenzeitung, a German financial daily. A follow-up to Jim's question on this exchange of opinions on sovereign debt. Can you give us some taste if there is a political will of the ministers to go ahead and to really go ahead with maybe legislative action or with something real before there is an agreement or at least some guidance from Basel how it will work internationally on the sovereign debt? Thank you.
No, we haven't come to that conclusion yet. Some of the ministers have stressed the importance to do it internationally, if not globally, and to work with the partners in Basel. And others have pointed out that in the Eurozone there are arguments to go ahead also separately if necessary. So let's see. As I said, this is not an issue, whichever way we're going to address it. This is not an issue to do very quickly or to implement overnight. It will take in a longer period anyway. So I think there is also a possibility to sort of over time bring those strands, work strands in Europe and in Basel together. So we'll do work on that. Yes, please.
Jan Struczewski from Reuters. I have a question that relates to what you agreed this morning about the contingency package for Greece. And Greek Finance Minister Tsakalotos came out soon afterwards saying it's legally impossible for Greece to legislate contingency measures. What are you going to do?
The institutions are going to work with the Greek authorities starting today or tomorrow to design that contingency measure. As I said, it needs to be credible, it needs to be upfront credible, and it needs to come into force in a kind of mechanism which is objective. What will trigger these measures? Let me make quite clear that I believe in the Greek press there was talk about a fourth bailout. That's absolutely not the case. This is about what if measures that are in the sort of the basis package were not to deliver the kind of figures that we need. Where we are now, if I look at the latest figures coming from Eurostat, the Greeks are well on track. They are very committed. I think that the package that is there for 95% is looking very good. So it's an extra sort of security package, and I think we just need to work on how that mechanism is going to look like. Of course, if there are legal constraints, we can't and we won't, we don't even want to break through legal constraints that are there in Greece. We will design it in a way that delivers on credibility, automaticity and objectivity, and it needs to be legally possible, of course. Yes, please.
Christopher Strzemka, Polish Press Agency. The question about the MFF and the midterm review. In which direction would you like to go to have more money for respond to such a crisis like the refugee crisis last year within this framework, which, as you mentioned, is quite not flexible? Thank you.
Well, there are a number of options. Perhaps the Commission would like to say more about that. I think around the table, most ministers were quite clear that it has to be within the ceilings of the MFF. We can't halfway change those ceilings or raise those ceilings. But what we can do is look for flexibility between different chapters, between periods in time. We can look at special instruments. Are they designed well? Should they be altered? So there are different possibilities within the framework to create that flexibility. And by the way, the Commissioner made quite clear, and I think she was right, that already in this MFF that we're in now, there is a lot more flexibility than we had in the past. The problem is, given the size of the crisis of migration at the moment, the flexibility has to quite a large extent already been used. And we're only, well, we're not even halfway in the period. So there are a number of options, but perhaps the Commission can say.
Thank you. Well, indeed. So the key word here is flexibility. There is quite a strong position of a number of member states not to review the ceiling, so that's clear. but then there is a possibility actually to see if we can redistribute the money between ceilings in a more flexible way, and also whether we can use, for example, remaining unused amounts in different ceilings of 2007-2013 to utilize also for purposes of refugee crisis. Also, if we can extend the scope of usage of some existing instruments. So there are actually different ways how to address this, and I'm sure if there is a constructive approach from all sides, it's certainly possible to find additional financing for refugee crisis also within existing ceilings.
Yes, Mark.
Good afternoon, Mark Peperkorn, Volkskrant Netherlands. It's a question about the initiative of the G5. It's for Mr. Dijsselbloem. First of all, a practical question. If now, apparently, because it has gotten the support of the other 23, when would this pilot project actually start? And secondly, a more political question. If there is now overall support of 28, why don't make it directly into an obligatory thing?
Very good point. Actually, we asked the Commission to take up on your second point, because it makes very good sense. If 28 countries say that they want to do something as a pilot, why not design it and make a common framework for it? So the Commission will look into that. On your first question, when can it start? You have to realize that, I know this from the Dutch experience, we still have to build this register. We don't have it as yet. So the register for the ultimate beneficiary ownership needs to be built. And I think that's true for a number of countries. We hope to set it up in the course of next year. Work has already started, but it's a whole new register. It needs to be built and operated. So I can't give you an exact date, but it will require in a number of countries still some very serious work. Yes, madam.
Susana Freixas, SIC Portugal. Actually, my question is for Vice President of ECB, Mr. Vitor Constâncio. I would like to ask you, when you asked Daniel Nui to intervene in the Commission's decision about Santander proposal, did you intend to benefit Santander? What were your intentions? This is a very important issue for Portugal. Thank you.
I will not comment on that question, which is totally outside the framework of this press conference, and I don't know exactly to what you are referring to, because, as you know, I don't follow in detail whatever is going on in Portugal regarding that issue and others.
Okay, very last question.
Sorry to insist, Raquel Moron Lopes, Portuguese Radio, Antena 1, sorry. But can you at least tell us when are you going to answer the Parliament's Inquiry Commission's questions, and how are you going to do that, through video conference or written answers? Can you at least tell us that?
We didn't receive any request in that regard, but as you know, from previous cases in different member countries, the ECB bodies do not respond before national parliaments in committees of inquiry because we only are accountable towards the European Parliament. And that was what happened in the case of Ireland and also already in the case of Portugal.
Okay.
That's it.
Thank you all very much. Have a good evening.
Sorry, but we had to. This was our only option to.